Good morning. Let's start off this morning by singing Out of My Way, and it's number 554. Stand or sit, either way.
got your Bible this morning, turn with me, if you would please, to Romans chapter 12. The 12th chapter of Romans, and while you are finding that book, verses, Brother Mike texted me Wednesday, Thursday, and said he wasn't feeling well, and he may need me to fill in for him today. He texted me yesterday about lunch and said he wasn't feeling well and he wasn't going to be able to make it today. So that's why I'm up here this morning. But if you got the Bible in Romans chapter 12, I want to look at two verses. We want to pick up from where we left off last week, that Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians 5:17, therefore if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature of creation. So he's talking about a man who's been born again. So what happened to that man after he's been born again? Is he just thrown out in the streets and just go back to his old life? What happens? And in Romans 12:1 and 2, Paul tells us the next logical step for this person. And so Paul begins by saying, I beseech thee, or literally beg you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, and present your bodies a living sacrifice, which is acceptable to God, which is a reasonable service. So I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, which is wholly acceptable to God, which is a reasonable service. So in this verse, he's telling us it's not unreasonable for me to ask you to do this. And as we look at Romans chapter 1 and 2, it deals with sin. And then chapter 3 through 5 deals with salvation. And chapter 6 through 8 deals with sanctification. Chapter 9 through 11 deals with the sovereignty of God. And chapter 12 deals with service. And so what Paul is telling to this young believer that's just had his life radically changed to get in God's service, I want to give you the step. So before we can come to verse 2, we have to come through verse 1. There are two words in verse 1 that we need to understand what they mean. In Paul's day, everybody knew what a sacrifice was. But no one knew what a living sacrifice was. So a sacrifice literally was in three different things. First, it cost the one who was giving the sacrifice, it cost him something. It wasn't free. He didn't go out and steal whatever he was sacrificing, whether it was a bullock, ram, lamb, grain offering, whatever. It came out of his own possession. It cost him something. The second thing is that when he brought it to be sacrificed and offered, he relinquished all rights to it. He had no more control over it. And the third aspect of it was that it is a form of worship. So Paul is telling us when we offer ourselves a living sacrifice, it'll cost you something. It will cost you something. And we offer ourselves unto God, and then we have all rights to it have been terminated. But it's about the means in which we worship. But when we come to verse 2, I want us to think, and I want us to look at three things in this one verse. I want us to look at the charge that Paul gives us. I want us to look at the challenge that comes to us. And I want us to look at the change. Then he says in verse 2, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So there is a transformation, a transforming that is to take place. And so Paul charges us to do that. And what is a charge anyway? What is anyway? It's simply that we have a challenge given to us. It's something that we are to do. It's something that a task or whatever. We are charged to do that. I want us to go back in 1 Kings chapter 4 or chapter 3. And I want to see this illustration is going to carry out to the church world itself. Go back to Kings. Let's look there and see what we can find. I think it's 2 Kings, one of the two. Maybe it is 1 Kings. Here we go. 1 Kings chapter 1, chapter 2, verse 1. This takes place, and I want to see in this illustration how this refers to an individual and the charge that Jesus gave to the church. In the days of David drew nigh that he should die, and he charged Solomon, his son, saying, so now this is charge. This is what David is giving him to do. He was giving him a duty, a task to do. And he says in verse 2 that he's going away his father. And then he said, be strong there and show thyself a man. And keep the charge of the Lord. The second thing, David gave him a charge, but God already had given David a charge, and now he was passing that on to his son Solomon. To keep his statutes, his commandments, and his judgment, and his testimony that is written in the law of Moses, that ye may be prosperous in all that thou doest, and wheresoever from thou turnest thyself. So this was a charge. Now what do you think that Solomon was thinking in his mind? What was he thinking when this took place? We'll go to chapter 3, verse 6. This is Solomon. Thou showed unto thy servant David, my father, great mercy, according as he walked before thee in truth and in righteousness, and uprightness of heart with thee, and thou hast kept from him the great kindness that thou hast given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. And then in verse 7 it says, and now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father, and I am but a child. I know not how to go out or to come in. Solomon is saying here, you have made me a king. I have this charge, but I don't know what to do. I don't know how to go in and to come out. And to really understand what Solomon is saying, to understand what going in and coming out means. We don't have time to get into it, but it was something he saw his father David do. So he said, I'm a child. I'm like a baby. There's no way that I can go and keep the charge he's given me in myself. I have seen how you have worked through my father David. And that's what I see from you. That's what I desire. And so he begins to pray and he asks God for wisdom. And then in verse 29, the 4th chapter, verse 29, and God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding, exceeding much, and largeness of heart, even as the sand is on this seashore. So it's a progression. First there was a charge. And like the church and believers, when they're first saved, born again, there is no way that I can live up to what I think a Christian should be. Solomon is saying the same thing here. And when the church came into existence, or the apostles, and they had been with Jesus these years, and when the responsibility came on them, the first thing they said was, I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. eventually, and God came to Solomon, and he gave him the wisdom and the knowledge to become a great king. Now let's go over to Matthew chapter 28. I want you to look at the charge that Jesus has given us and the church as well. And Solomon is a perfect picture of this charge. So Jesus has been resurrected from the dead. He appears unto the disciples, and this is before he has gone away. And as he approached them, he started with this: all power was given unto me in heaven and earth. So they are bound to say, well, we can't do this. And Jesus is saying, remember, all power is given unto me. All power, as it is in heaven. He is to be their source of power. And then he says, go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always unto the end of the world. So this is the promise. He says, you go. I have given you the power to begin a church, or I've given you power as an individual to be overcomers. And you to go out into the world, and the first thing that undoubtedly must have thought, how can we do this? Not the whole world. How can we do this? But we know when Pentecost came that what Jesus was saying, I have all power from heaven. And he came and gave it unto the church. That same power that began the church and woke men up is the same power that he gives every individual that are born again. God would never charge us to do something if we didn't equip us to do it. He just wouldn't. So the first thing I want us to see is the charge. Paul charged the Roman church, the Roman church, and every individual charged them for something. What was that? Something was to be transformed. What was that transformation? When would it take place, and what would it consist of? So they heard it. The second thing that Solomon began to think was, it challenged his mind. It challenged his mind. And I want us to answer two questions in this. First question is, why do I need to transform my mind? Why? And the second question is, if I'm going to transform my mind, what am I going to transform it into? We can transform our mind into many things. You can take a person and brainwash them and they'll think anything. No matter how unreasonable it may sound, but they are brainwashed, transform their mind into thinking whatever they're brainwashed to think. But I want us to look at one thing and begin to think about our mind. Our minds are a wonderful thing. They are made up of 100 billion neurons. 100 billion. They have these connectors, which they estimate is 1 trillion. These neurons simply transfer information one part of our brain to the other. And to bring that kind of into perspective, if you ever seen a documentary on the Amazon rainforest and how many hundreds of thousands of acres that there are, and they estimate there are 100 billion trees in the rainforest, that represents the neurons, and the connectors is like every tree has all these leaves on it. Hundreds. They're the connectors. And if you look at that, that's how amazing that our brain is. That our brain is. They calculate, how many ever watch on a baseball game and professional especially? And the batter comes up, and then the outfield, and we'll say he's in center field, he's standing out there, and he watches the pitcher, and when the pitcher begins to wind up through the ball, his concentration is on that ball. He watches the pitcher as the ball leaves his hand, he watches it go to the catcher, and he hears the crack of the bat, he sees the ball come up, and he has to make a judgment. How am I going to catch that ball? And the scientists said they estimated that our brain in that instant has 732 million calculations that it goes through. And it directs the body to move these calculations. Should I run forward? Is it over my head? Do I need to go to my right or to my left? Our vision is included in that, everything. And you watch it so easily, he throws up his glove and he catches the ball. but all these calculations have taken place first. And we are, and what we do, and what we are, is our mind. The Bible calls it heart. Many places it's the heart. And we are, this is the way we operate, this is the way we live. Our five senses is interpreted us by our brain. And it stores memory. Memories that are embedded in our brain that are there forever. You take the senses of touch, you go out when you're young or whatever, and your parents say, listen, don't you dare touch that stove, it's hot. Somehow they'll scoot over that stove and touch it, they'll get burned, but in that instant, downloaded in that brain is this sensation of pain, of burning, and it's there. And they look at it the next time their brain brings, they remember to them the pain that is there. Or if you've been out one day working, you're hot and you're tired and you're sweating, you're dirty, you come in, you take a shower, and you feel that cool water comes on it and it dries you and refreshes you, and it puts in your memory bank that sensation. And it's carried, you're carried forever. And when you're out doing whatever, and your brain brings memory, take a cool shower. And you remember all the feelings that you had. And then slide. It's one of the five senses. Our brain takes it and we look at the sun and see how bright it is. And it tells us, don't do that anymore. You ever run outside? And the next time we go out when the sun is shining, we don't look up. Because it computes us not to do it. Or we can walk out and see a beautiful garden with flowers or whatever, and it burns that memory into our mind. And we sit and every time we think of a garden, we'll see that picture in our mind. There's the sense of hearing. And our brain takes words and begins to build in our memory bank when we begin to talk. Even before we talk, we teach our children to know means don't do it. And in their memory, in their brain, it is embedded there. No means don't do that. It don't mean they listen to it all the time, but it means it's there. It warns them. And so it simply just goes on to tell us there's smell. We smell gas or something else. Our brain tells us don't strike a match. And all of this, and taste, and all of this is there. But I want us to know and to look why we need to transform our mind. If you got your Bible, go back with me in Genesis chapter 3. And I know we have come many times to this chapter, but I want us to see if this answers the question why I need to have my mind transformed. And we find this chapter is open. We find the serpent is here. We find Eve is here. And we get a description of the serpent in verse 1. He is crafty and all this. And so he asked Eve a question. He said, did God say you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? He posed her question. And when he posed her this question, she had to give an answer. And what answer could she give? Only what had been embedded in her mind. Whatever you put in your mind is all your brain can bring to your remembrance. And so he put her in, and she had all this experience watching God physically come to her. She has heard him speak, and she has heard all of this. But I want you to notice the next thing that took place in verse 3. But she is answering him, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. Now, why is this verse important? The serpent is going to take this verse and prove to Eve in her mind that God is a liar. How does this work? This verse teaches us why it is important to know the truth. Because we can only act upon the truth that we have. This is what she had in her brain, in her heart. This is what she had put there. When the question was asked, this is her response. And we wonder, how did she ever misinterpret what God said? Only she knows. And so the serpent is going to come and convince her that God is a liar. And he dangles before her, verse 5, for God said, you know that in the day you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, you shall be as God, knowing good and evil. So he is tempting her with the possibility that she can be God. So he said, Eve, come in. I think they probably whatever, Eve, come in. You know, I like you enough. I watched you for days in the garden. You seem like pretty good folks. And you said that God said you shall not touch either the tree. I want to tell you a little secret. That's not why he told you not to do that, but he knows that in the day that you eat of it, you'll become like him. Come here. And I said he'd bring Eve over there and look up, and there's the tree of life. He would reach up and take a fruit down and say, hey, look at this. I'm holding it in my hand. Did I die? Hey, come here. Just give me your hand. Just give me your hand. Just take one finger. That's all I want, just one finger. Let me have it. Took that finger and brought it over. Just barely touched it. She barely touched it. Now see there, did you die? Did you die? And he just kept on until she finally, she took it, she held it in her hand. And the more she looked at it, the more tempting it was to eat. And then her brain was calculating all this, and I think like God. And she remembered how God came down from glory, and the heavenly host came with them, and how they were singing praises unto him. And she watched God in all of his glory as he walked through the garden, and he was speaking things would be formed. And her brain is saying, you can be this. You can be so transformed that you can be like him. And her brain began to calculate. Her emotion, we're a triune being. We're body, soul, and spirit. My soul has mind, emotion, and will. And so in her mind, she began to think these things. And her emotions began to swell up and take over. And they began to say, this is what you can be. It's already proven that God's lying to you. He's keeping the best from you. And her will came into being. What is she going to do? She is going to act upon what she has put into her mind. Emotion swells up. And most of the time, emotion will overrule common sense. How many of you ever went out and bought a car or a house or something like this, and you knew that you shouldn't have done it? You knew you shouldn't have done it. You knew if you bought a car, you knew that it was going to be a hardship to pay for it if you could, but your emotion just rose up in you and said, listen, everybody will be one just like you. And her emotions overruled. Her emotions overruled her. And she took. And we know the consequences that came from it. But memory is the way that we know God. We know by the memory and what we store up in there. And that's what we really act upon. So, now I want us to go to Romans chapter 1. This is what there are two things in the story. Eve, she knew God in limited capacity, but she knew the principles of God. And then Eve understood too late that God was true. Now in Romans chapter 1, I want us to see why we need to transform our mind. Go over in verse 20. For the invisible things of him of the creation world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So God is saying, has given unto man a measure of faith. God has revealed himself unto them, and none other, even through nature. Nature has God's principles in it, revealing it to mankind. You can see it in the sunrise and sunset. You can see it in the seed that's planted in the ground. You can see it in the army. He just puts it all there. And so man knew this. But this is what man did, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like the incorruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. And then in verse 34, God gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their flesh. And so this is what they were putting in their mind. They were excluding the revelation that God was giving them through nature or through the spoken word or whatever. They took it, they refused it, and as you read the rest of that chapter, they began to simply just go down. In verse 25, they changed the truth of God into a lie. They worship and serve the creature more than the Creator, or Satan, or his ways. For this cause God gave them to vile affections, even the women did change the natural uses of which is against nature. Even nature teaches us that that's sin. But they were headstrong, going in that direction, and they were going to do this. They had excluded God from their mind. When He's excluded, there's nothing to hinder sin from taking our life. There's absolutely nothing. You watch it and you read the rest of that chapter, and they begin on this downhill slide. Until finally there came a time in which God just simply said, I'm through. I'm just giving you up to your reprobate mind. That's why we need a transformed mind. That we not go down that path to come there to go in this direction. Now, let's look over to Galatians chapter 5. And I want us to look at one who had their minds transformed. And I want us to see the difference. And in verse 22 of the 5th chapter of Galatians, Paul is telling us this, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. And so Paul is saying this, he's like a garden of fruit. We look at a fruit, we do not know what takes place inside of that tree. We do not know what all that goes on. All we see is the evidence of the fruit that is on that tree. So Paul is telling them there, if you possess this fruit of the Spirit, it's simply this, that they look at that and they know that something took place within you. They may not know what it is, but the first thing is love, and that simply is manifest by simply caring about someone else. It's a joy. It's a joy. There is peace. There's no longer fighting between you and God, the Spirit. He has come to bring peace in your soul. That peace permeates and just makes itself shown to other people. You see the striking contrast between Romans chapter 1 and Galatians chapter 5. That's the difference of transformation that takes place. And it doesn't take place in the body, but it takes place in our mind, in our spirit. Next thing I want us to look at is the change. Look at it very quickly. I have about 4 or 5 sermons in this thing. And no way. But I want us to look at the change. There are 3 reactions to change. The first one, the most common one, is resistance. I'm not going to change. There is resistance. Absolutely, they're not going to do this. And I read about this, about change. Martin Van Buren, who was the governor of New York, he wrote a letter to the president, then Jackson, and it was January the 31st, 1829. And he was resisting change of the railroad. He wrote in part of the letter, in essence, Mr. President, as you may know, railroad carriages speed of 15 miles per hour by engine which endangers lives, but roar and snort through countryside, setting fire to crops, scaring livestock, women, children. God did not intend people to travel at this breakneck speed. it seems amusing today, but he resisted that change. He wasn't going to be part of it. And we are resistant to change many times in our life. So the first reaction to Paul is resistance. I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. The second part of a challenge or a change is toleration. I'll tolerate. We tolerated people before. We just don't like them. We don't like what they do. We don't have anything to do. But they come in our presence or we just tolerate. Just get rid of them. There are those who come and say, well, I'll tolerate it. I'll listen to it. But I'm really not going to change. I'm really not. And the third one here is to embrace it. This is what Paul is saying. Embrace this change. So what are we going to be transformed into? If we come to that place and we embrace it, what are we going to be changed into? Well, I want us to go to 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15. This is how the transformation of our mind takes place. He lays it out for us. Paul tells Timothy, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Rightly dividing the word of truth. And I thought about this verse, and I remember when I was in the first grade, that when I schooled, I went to the first and second grade in the same room. And you can imagine jerking you up from your mother. You've been around all your life. She's carried most of your needs. And she picks you up and she hugs you and kisses you and talks to you, and you're this special. They take you out of that environment, they bring you to a schoolhouse, put you in a room with a bunch of kids, most of them you've never seen. There's this teacher up there that you may know her name, you may not, and you've never seen her before, and now she is going to be over me. And when she would teach the first grade, then she would teach the second grade, give us something to do while she taught them, and I'd listen to her teach, and they maybe math or reading or whatever, and I just said, it's not like I can do that. How do they do that? But you know, after that year of perseverance, after that year of study, after that year of listening to her teach, my mind was transformed into her way of thinking. And at the end of that year, I could remember back, and I could do what some of them were doing, the second grade. I was gradually being changed and transformed into what I needed to be a civilian that would contribute to this country. And every year simply added on what you had learned the year before. And that's what Paul is saying here. It does not come, God does not come and open our minds in and pour in all of this knowledge that He wants us to have. Our part is to be diligent, to study. Study is to be diligent. Take time. It has to be time. There is absolutely no shortcut to it whatsoever. And you have to have time. You have to get in the Word. Because what you have in the Word and put in your heart and your mind is what you are going to live by. to hear someone tell you, or some preacher tell you, but check it out, to be sure. And if Eve had been out one day and she had heard the preacher say, well, God said, don't even touch it. If you don't touch it, then you put a perimeter around it, and you be more secure than ever. That's not true. If she would have checked it out and discovered that touching was not part of what God said, that she could touch it, but not eat it. That is transforming us. And this Bible is no more than the book. The book is no more than the mind of God Himself. It has been written. It's an inspiration of the Holy Spirit upon these scriptures. And men wrote it as it was given to them using their words and how they want to express it. But it's God breathed. And the more that you put in your mind, the more you have to combat sin. The more you'll combat it. And the more you're less likely to be persuaded by Satan himself. So He's given us. Paul tells us that this word is the mind of Christ. So what do we want to be transformed into? Transformed into the image of God. Transformed by the renewing of our mind. Take our mind, the old garbage and junk that is in there, and erase the memory and put in there what God said. Put it there. And the next time you come upon something, you see something to somebody, and somebody does you wrong, and your mind's on the brain from your emotion, get it. First thing you think about, get it. But yet our mind also brings forth the scriptures that we're to love everybody. Forgive. Forgive your neighbor. We have the truth there. Our will comes in and says, which one you want me to do? And we simply say, God said what He said is what I want to do. That's what He said. And so, we see why we need to be transformed, and then we see what we are transformed into. Our mind is what's transformed. And it can only come by study. You go through school, or how many years you go to school, college, whatever. All of those years, if you're going to be successful, it's spent in study. If you want a degree, a doctor, or whatever it is, you spend years studying. For you have a goal, you want to reach that goal, whatever it is, being a doctor, a GP, or a surgeon, or whatever. And you are never going to obtain it until you spend those years studying and mastering what that doctor should know and do. It's no different than the Word. You can spend years studying. And that studying pays off, and it begins to master you. And your body goes out and presents itself. For every day our bodies go out and present ourselves to the world as they see us. And in those bodies, in that body, they can either see the world, the principle of Satan, or they can either see God and the principle of God. Everywhere we go, we are a living witness and testimony to whom we believe and give our allegiance And the Word is always, for 40 years, has excited me because every time I see truth that I've never seen before. All the time. And they store it in my memory, and they're there, and I can count on them and rely on them when I need it. So even today, Paul is challenging us through his Word. And you've heard it. You may resist it. Or you may tolerate it, but really not going to do it. Or you can embrace it. And when you embrace it, look what it can lead to. A lot of people, I'm close with this. A lot of people like Eve. Thanks God is alive. Because he has not come and do what they think he should do. He has not come in sickness and death. Oh, we may not understand. God doesn't give us answers all the time. But we look at that and we say, well, God should do this way. His Word said this, and he didn't do it, so he's a liar. But you cut back the chase and look at it. They didn't have the whole truth. Just all of it. That's why, in this day and age in which we live, it's so important that we know the man of Christ. And we have no excuse. We got this Word that is the man of Christ. We have untold number of Bibles. Really, where we can understand it. I discovered one about a year ago, and I read it all the time. When I'm in a hurry, just see what the Scripture says, and it brings, it's a message. The Bible called the message. And it brings it into modern day terms, and you can understand quickly what King James is saying. There are all kinds of Bibles out there. But they only do as good if we'll study and find our life. Father, I thank you for the Word this morning. I thank you for the revelation of your Word this week, and why we desperately need to transform our mind into your way of thinking. Fill it with your Word and your love. So, Father, take this message and just impress it upon our hearts this day, that we would choose. It's a choice for you to transform our mind. For it's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, has anybody got a prayer request today while we're here?
I'd like to thank everyone that's been praying for Amy. They arrived in Rochester about 30 minutes ago, so they should be at the Mayo Clinic. Thank you so much.
Anybody else? I'm ready to thank you. Look, this morning said I would like to thank everyone for all the cards, phone calls, prayers, and words of encouragement during the loss of my dad. As most of you know, he had a long battle for him. It was a long battle for him, but his hurt no more. Even though my heart is heavy, I know he is in a better place. Thank you from the bottom of my heart and for the delicious meal provided for my family during this time of grief. I am so blessed to be a part of such a wonderful church group. And it's from Joe Atkins' family, Heather, Jason, Michelle,